Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Today we're going to talk about inner guidance, which seems very apropos. Right now, particularly in this environment of rapid and unpredictable change in the world in many different domains, it's difficult to know where to look in order to orient ourselves, both internally and externally. So as Jungians, this is something that we ponder, something that we work with, and in the larger sense, it has something to do with the relationship with the outer world versus the relationship to the inner world. So we're going to move around this topic a bit because it seems so relevant and I think so useful.
And of course, one of the best ways to attend to the inner world and to find inner guidance is through dreams. So we would like to invite you to explore Dream School, which is our online 12-month self-paced program that helps you learn how to work with your own dreams, how to kind of harvest that wisdom and that guidance. And it's a wonderful community, and there's lots of great material there. And you get to spend time with each one of us every month in live events. So check it out.
So as part of inner guidance, dream work, of course, is central to that. But I'd like to just start a little bit from the mysticism of the idea of inner guidance, because, of course, there is a very pragmatic psychological domain, but also the idea that there is some divine spark that is interested in us, that is invested in us, and is trying to communicate essential information to us, is something that is universal. We find this in religions, ancient and modern. And it is something that we have woven into our culture and our psyches.
You know, interestingly, though, that is a kind of an idea, I think, in every major religion. It's not usually a major idea in schools of psychology. And I think that's what sets a Jungian approach apart, is that, our worldview incorporates this idea that there is some kind of central motivational guiding center of the psyche. I think I used central twice in that sentence.
Because it's an important idea.
Yes. And Jung called it the self, and he capitalized the S in those cases.
Before we get too tangled up in that, it is simply a fact, as Jung said over and over again, and sometimes he sounded like he was just pleading, because he would say the psyche is real, but the psyche is real. So whether you think it's out there or in here or under there or somewhere in the back of your closet, the fact of the matter is it's real. There is a source of knowing beyond our ego, cognitive, frontal cortex, so-called rational mind. And we know that from a million examples of intuition and dreams, of course, and 100 other ways that we grab hold of something that wasn't just us thinking it through.
On Saturday, May 17th, join me and Deb for a Shadow and Dreams seminar, a sneak preview of how we work with shadow and dreams in this Jungian Life Dream School. Every night, our dreams confront us with shadow, what the waking mind doesn't want to know. Our dreams bring shadow close in order to compensate, complement, or contradict the conscious attitude. During the 1-hour session, we'll dive deeper into Carl Jung's concept of the shadow and see how it fits in with dream work. We'll also conduct a live dream interpretation using a dream submitted by an attendee. There'll be time to ask your questions about Jungian dream analysis, and we'll reveal a special TJL Dream School offering for spring 2025, exclusive to seminar attendees. There will be a recording available if you book a space and then can't make it. So, if you're curious about shadow and dreams or would like to know more about our Dream School, we hope to see you at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, May 17th. Follow the link in the show notes to book your free space.
So one way we can think of inner guidance is a way to cultivate in ourselves an ability to extend our senses and our receptivity beyond our own ego experience. And so the mystic Rudolf Steiner, who I reference from time to time, he had this idea that the auditory center of the brain is the most evolved part of the human vehicle, most ready to perceive the inner worlds, to perceive the extra information that our five senses don't provide. And so he had this really interesting exercise to cultivate the certain kind of receptivity that the auditory center provides. So, in one way, all of us know this, but we may not be cultivating it. If you've ever been asleep and then you suddenly wake up and you think you heard somebody opening the front door of your place, you become very still, very focused. You're casting your receptivity out, looking for any information. Hearing a floorboard creak, is there any evidence that somebody is actually in the house? But that capacity to cast your receptivity out beyond your own mind is something that Steiner felt you could extend into a rather remarkable realm. So his exercise was to sit quietly, notice the sound that's easy here. Like, for instance, I can always hear my refrigerator, which I have no idea why it's so loud, but I can always hear the refrigerator mumbling, in the background. And then what's the next furthest sound? Like, I can hear the finches just right outside the window because there's a nest. And then what's the sound beyond that? What's the tiniest sound that you can hear? And then to focus on whatever is beyond that. And that targeted way of listening stimulates our own capacity to choose to be receptive. So we can listen people. We can listen friends. We can listen or be receptive to any number of domains of curiosity and pick up information that our egos previously was not attending to. And Steiner's suggestion is that there is a whole inner world that is enchanted and uncanny, which also would like to communicate to us and does so through this deep cultivation of listening.
I like especially what you said, Joseph, about extending our receptivity. I'm going to really pay attention to what I can hear right now in my environment versus screening a lot of that out. And by practicing that, of really tuning in, paying attention, what else is out there? What if we practiced that in a whole array of realms of listening to people more attentively, paying attention to our dreams, meditation? There are any number of activities that we can get interested in and be receptive to. And who knows what you might learn.
I love framing it as listening to, Joseph. I think that that's a really lovely invitation. And, I think what we're talking about really is our relationship to the self, this kind of central guiding aspect of us that Jung once said might as well be called the God within. And in essence, what you're saying is that we could try to really listen to this part of ourselves. And there's an idea in Jungian thought called the Ego Selfaxis, which is a pretty unappealing way to describe it. But I think what it's getting at is so very important and really central to what we're talking about today is here's my ego, this conscious part of me, my waking personality that does a pretty good job every day, thank you, ego, of navigating and negotiating the outer world and to a certain extent the inner world. But how in touch with this guiding center of the personality is my ego? What is that connection like, that axis? Can I listen to the self? What are the ways how does the self speak? We've mentioned dreams already, and obviously that's a huge way, and we'll be coming back to it. But there are other ways as well. And can I listen? Can I attune to that and stretch my ear to hear the promptings and the guidance coming from the self?
And so often the self communicates in symbolic language, so to speak, that when we are listening to the inner world, sometimes it comes across in words, but more often there are images and feelings, intuitions, hunches, and it's our job to decipher the language of the self, which again is a major part of dream interpretation. And while the dream is guidance from the self, it still requires a certain amount of deciphering. It's like reading a letter that you got from the self. But we don't have to only be unconscious in order to receive impressions, images, feelings from that central intelligence. We can be awake and tending to that ego self-access. It's kind of like the bat phone. In Batman, you lift that cake, the cake. What do you call that thing when you have a dome over your cake? There's a name for it.
A cake cover?
Something like that. But, the commissioner would walk over and there'd be this glass bowl over it and he'd pick the top off and pick up the red phone and call Batman. But there is this ego self-access, and it requires often discovery and tending.
And like cultivation. Yeah.
Cultivation, which makes sense because the first half of life, the ego needs to eventually be less influenced by the inner world so that we can put our awareness into the horizontal frame, and which is all the tasks of getting through grade school and middle school and high school and college and launching and having relationships. And that is an appropriate horizontal world, the voice of the times.
Yes.
And under great duress, young people will awaken an inner thread that helps them navigate and stay safe. Alice Miller wrote a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child. And the gift is that children put under great duress prematurely actualize survival capacities to become extremely predictively aware of the environment, tending to all the nuances and suggestions, as well as managing the effect of the environment on the child by shifting in and out of awareness of what's happening. All of these survival skills drive a child to an inner refuge. Interestingly enough, many of the individuals who have very high levels of intuition and even psychic abilities had somewhat traumatogenic homes, so that from a very early age, they had to find the inner place in order to navigate. Thank goodness, most people are not cast into that quite so young. And then they need to either experience an inner awakening in midlife, or something else awakens them to this potential of inner listening, which they just haven't needed prior to this.
I think that kind of hyper awareness comes from a lot of different places through a lot of different circumstances. And some people can also just tune things out. But what it does is to direct our attention sometimes outward of, what's going on, what time, who's in what kind of mood. And where I'm enlarging this is that in today's world, our attention is constantly demanded to be turned outward, to go here, to talk to these people, to answer these emails, to do those errands, to take care of the kids, to listen to the news. It goes on and on. I don't think ever in the history of mankind has there been so much external stimulus. And that I think what you're talking about with Jung's concept of the self, the God within, we could also simply talk about as how do we find our own sort of centered place, our own stance. And sometimes I image it in such a mundane, practical way as sort of like the athletic stance where your knees are a little bent and you're ready, but you're grounded. You have yourself planted on the tennis court or wherever it might be, of I am here. I have access to me because whatever I'm about to do, I'm going to do with myself. So do I have myself available to respond to another person, make a decision, or even attend to my own confusion about what I should do in this moment, or maybe it's something, a bigger life decision of how do we get in touch with ourselves?
Yeah. And how do we, if the ego is confused, how do we sit with that, like you were saying, Deb, and see if there's an answer? Sometimes there is no answer that comes up. Sometimes the confusion is just where we need to be, but sometimes it is a case that something kind of speaks to us. I remember, and again, this is going back to listening. I remember being at I would say it was kind of a critical point in my life, though I'm not sure I knew it then. And I was working overseas, and I was contemplating whether or not I should stay there or I should come back and actually go to social work school, because I was interested in this crazy project of maybe possibly becoming a Jungian analyst.
Oh, wow.
And
Madness.
I was kind of torn and tossed, and there was of course a romance issue in there to just confuse things further. And I remember I remember where I was standing in our office right on the Adriatic in Split, Croatia, looking out at the water and the sunset. And it literally it wasn't exactly like a sort of like a hallucinatory voice where I thought I was hearing it coming from outside. But boy, was it autonomous, and it spoke very clearly. It said, you must just proceed, according to what you know now.
Oh.
And that was like, okay, then I guess I'd better get myself to graduate school, because that's the only kind of clear path I had. And it was a really important experience. Obviously, it sort of directed me at this critical juncture, kind of directed me in what I, of course, now think was the right way. But, there are other cases that are a little bit less dramatic. We think about listening to our intuition. You can often tune into your body when you're making a decision. Just sort of take a second, drop in, just kind of do a little body scan and notice, like, what does your body think about this decision? Does your body have anything to say? Because you might feel like a tension in your core or kind of a tightness in your throat, or sometimes even just a feeling of agitation in your arms or legs, for example. So that's, there's kind of there's guidance, and some of the way that the self speaks is through guidance through the body, just these kind of subtle bodily sensations. Historically, Socrates had a voice. He called it his daimyonen. I hope I'm pronouncing it that right. And most of the time it warned him if he was about to make a mistake. And but sometimes it was a voice, maybe a little bit like the voice that I experienced in Croatia. But sometimes it was maybe like someone sneezing at a particular moment. And what we think we know is that when Socrates was faced with the possibility of his own execution by drinking the hemlock, he acceded to that, partly because his voice didn't warn him that it was a problem. And he knew that was probably okay.
So the hemlock was delivered by pouring it into his ear. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. Wow, I didn't know that. Jeez. But I think that this wisdom, whether it's Socrates' voice or the little voice I heard, or tending to your body or your intuition, or these other ways that we're going to continue to talk about, they are quiet. So Deb, going back to your point, if your phone is constantly pinging with notifications, it is harder to tend to them because it's a little voice.
That's why I like so much your example, Joseph, of extending your listening. That is a useful, doable exercise in quieting down and being receptive. And I like that a lot. And I think it's a lot to know, too, if we quiet down and, as you were saying, Lisa, pay attention to our bodies of what do I notice of, something kind of hurts, or I'm jiggling my foot, or whatever that might be, of getting still so that we can tune in to ourselves, what our bodies might be saying to us, that our receptors are open to ourselves rather than we're in response mode, checking our phone, listening to the news, or whatever it might be. First, my mantra might be is, first, just sit down. Just sit down. Job one. Stop. Redirect. Listen. Listen to your body. Listen to the environment. Be there.
So when I think about listening to the body, I think of the wisdom of the instincts. Jung has given us a map of the psyche and defined some of the various domains, which I think can be helpful to us in terms of, where are we directing our listening and what are we beckoning to? So if we think about the body, the body has millions of years of wisdom in your bones.
Yes.
This body that you are sitting in right now is the fortuitous confluence of some thousands and thousands of beings that have successfully navigated all kinds of very, very difficult times. Your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather and grandmother were probably had to be pretty canny to kind of survive in a world with none of the amenities that we enjoy in this life.
Right. Or not to mention the fish that were related to millions of years ago. Yeah.
So the body, if we are not in a terribly neurotic state, if the body is free enough to respond to reality, is giving us very important information. And in fairy tales, it is often the talking animal that gives the stark, clear, unsentimental advice. It's the guy's, riding along, and the wolf says, if you let me eat your horse, then I will give you everything that you need. And then the young man says, well, okay. And then the wolf gives him do this, don't do that, try this. And almost always, it seems to work out for the hero. So there is an inner guidance that comes from your cells in your body, ancient and wise. That's one place to go for something other than ego assessment of things.
I'm also thinking that it can help to pay attention to what you're feeling. And our bodies often tell us that. If my foot is jiggling, wow, what's that about? What am I feeling? Am I feeling confused, stressed, agitated, interested, in a hurry? How am I doing? And to get curious about that. So, I think what we're exploring here is that the self can talk to us, in pretty big ways, like happened to you, Lisa. But it can also talk to us in small ways that help us stay in touch with ourselves. Physical exercises like listening that we can do, sitting still, all systems stop. What's going on inside? How am I doing? How are we doing? Hey there, inner self. Hey there, body, emotions, heart, gut. Let's connect here for a minute.
When you describe cultivating this particular state, Deb, it reminds me of just the state of readiness.
Finding our stance.
Which is, what a healthy, non-neurotic ego does. It's that, and by non-neurotic, I mean in touch with the realities around us. We're not distracted by something painful that happened when we were in 4th grade, which then interferes. It kind of coats the lens of vision with information that doesn't belong there. So a state of clean readiness means that we're awake, we're poised, our senses are clean, we're taking in information, as what you were saying, Deb, and then I am noticing what I do with the information around me and making the best response to that is possible. And I think that is something that is available to any of us, and something that human beings have relied on to just stay alive in this ever-changing environment. I do think that putting the ego into a healthy state of readiness, which is different from hypervigilant anxiety. Readiness is actually a state that is very free. It's not a clenched state where you are anticipating you're about to punch life in one way or another. Readiness, to me, has to do with an open, fluid, grounded stance where then we can respond effectively to one thing or another. For me, I don't associate that particular state as having to do with the ego self-access, but I do think it is something that from the level of ego we can do and is in our hands and is helpful in terms of coping with an ever-changing environment. So there's a very pragmatic orientation to the world, and then there is that slightly mystical capacity, which all of us have access to if it's interesting, and it's not interesting to everyone. But if it's interesting, there are hundreds, thousands of years of experiments are
Yeah.
regarding this ability to transcend ego states and catch glimpses of other things, whether it's
Mhm.
emergent patterns that give us a sense of quote unquote the future, that the unconscious is processing billions of bits of information and is capable of noticing emergent patterns far earlier than the ego could possibly do that. And so, if we can open that door to the unconscious by decision, and that's the difference between, let's say, the training towards inner guidance versus a psychotic break, is that we have some methodology to open the door and also close the door so
Mhm.
that we're not flooded with material.
So let's talk about some ways to open the door and close the door, but how can we operationalize more of this?
In most traditions, it begins with the decision that I'm going to set aside, just as you said, Deb, I'm going to turn the phone off. I'm going to get away from the kids. I'm going to get somewhere quiet. And
Mhm.
I'm going to start with setting an intention. Like, this is the opening to inner guidance part of my day.
Mm.
And so there's something about the ritual of deciding, and
Mhm.
that may be you're alone, there's a journal and a pen. And as you begin to
Mhm.
expand that sensitivity and receptivity, that you take the impressions you receive seriously enough to at least jot down. As small a step as that is, and I've done this for many years, I will go back into some of those impression journals and I'll find something. One, I'm thinking, who wrote that? That sounds better than anything I would have come up with. But also, it wasn't really relevant until quite further down the line. And I couldn't see that at the time.
And we can also write down our dreams, even if it's a so-called snippet. And it comes up for me with people all the time. People will say, "Well, all I have is a dream snippet," and it's really sort of the world in a grain of sand. Oftentimes, it'll come down to 2 sentences.
Mhm.
But sit with yourself and write them down and muse upon them. I know for myself that the mornings that I start with myself and a journal make all the difference in how the rest of my day is going to go. It makes all the difference. And then I don't do it
Yeah.
because I have
Yeah.
places to go and things to do and I want my coffee.
So it takes a certain strength to make it happen.
It's like there's like an issue. I always think about it like it's a discipline.
Mhm.
It's a discipline, and starting the morning by journaling or writing down your dreams can really help with dream recall. Some of the resources that we have in Dream School will help you to recall your dreams better. Once you start working with your dreams, you're likely to recall them better. And of course, kind of talking about that intention. I mean, I think that some people have remarked that they joined Dream School and that's when they started remembering their dreams. So it's you're making a commitment, right? You're really making a commitment to do this, and we have some exercises and assignments that kind of help with that.
And I think that's important, that the unconscious is like a person. It's not like a machine. It's not like a
Yes.
car you stick a key into and you make it do things.
Yeah, that's great.
That just as Lisa was saying, that the respectful beckoning to the unconscious, it
Mhm.
responds to that because it is alive and is conscious in its own way.
Yes. And we call it the dream maker,
Mhm.
so it's a person, an energy of whatever. But, Jung says over and over, the unconscious is autonomous and it has direction.
Yeah.
It is autonomous. I really would like to dream about this because I have this big decision, and then I dream about my third grade teacher, Mrs. Humison.
Because the
Ah,
unconscious thinks that's where the gold is.
right.
That's
Right.
the important thing.
You, Deb, may be interested in whether to do A or B, but I am interested in something else. But another way to have a moment with yourself is you may have a little snippet of a dream image. Make up a story about it. You don't remember the dream, but my fictitious dream about my third grade teacher. What was it about Mrs. Humison? What do I remember? What do I take? What is the feeling? Or a tarot deck
Mm-hmm.
of some people draw a card every day of what will that give you? It's their images that are archetypal images, a wonderful system of symbolism. You can read a little bit about it and go, I wonder why I drew this card.
Right. And just even like it's an image, right? The tarot as a divinatory tool is particularly interesting because it's so image based. And so it's like explicitly symbolic in that sense. And I mean, any, Si Ching or the runes or whatever, they're all great.
Right.
But tarot in particular, you can do this thing where you can just like be with that image, So really, I think what we're talking about again and again is opening up, like bypassing the purely rational mind to make room for the non-rational and create a relationship with it.
Yes.
Right. And it's not like, oh, I'm just going to go off and find my non-rational mind and then totally act on that. No, you have to stay grounded. You have to sort of like let everything pass the common sense test, So when I was, I don't know, making my decision there at that window and Split, do I go home? Do I stay here? And it was like, all right, yes, I have this impulse to want to go back to the States and enroll in a graduate program. Does that pass the common sense test? Well, it's a risk, but it's not off, it's not completely off the range, right? I'm not, I don't know, I'm not going to buy a bridge in Brooklyn or something, you do have to kind of, I think, like run things through that filter a little bit. But you are looking for, what does the unconscious think right now? What does the unconscious think about my plan? I may be very worried about my retirement savings, but maybe the unconscious has something else that it's noodling on. And the unconscious has a very different sense of time than consciousness does. So we're very worried about what's going to happen today and next week and next month. The unconscious is kind of partakes of the world of the eternal. And in many senses, it's preoccupied with sort of ultimate concerns. So it's really good to check in with it and see what it might have to say, because it's probably going to have a very different perspective about what's important than our waking conscious mind.
And Jung gives us an additional way of tracking this unconscious movement, and he talks about a gradient forming inside of himself down which libido flows towards an inner object. And so Jung, in his biography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, and he wrote that or dictated it when he was very elderly, and he says that people have been asking him to write autobiographies forever and ever, and a gradient never formed, and so he just couldn't do it. All of a sudden, his secretary, Anila Jaffe, says, how about this idea? And he checks inside himself, not outside. He checks inside and he says, a gradient is forming and my libido is flowing in the direction of an autobiography. So this is subtle in one sense and then not otherwise. So when we check inside of ourselves and we notice, where is our life force flowing? Where is our desire accumulating? Where is the magnetic image inside of us? And Jung tells us that libido, or life force, is intelligent. It has its own wisdom, and it's, in a sense, providing guidance to the ego in as much as it's making its own decisions and announcing them to us by providing or withholding vitality regarding any particular venture that we are engaged with.
Yeah. And that's it's such an ordinary thing to say, and it's so big. What you've just said is, wait a minute, where's my vitality?
Yeah. Yeah.
I really should, and that's often a clue as well, do X or Y or Z versus something gets lit up inside me. I want to. And that is a wonderful thing to sit with yourself in just a very daily way of what does my day look like? What am I up for? How am I feeling about this? Where's my energy? Where is the libido flowing? Where's the gradient? And there are plenty of things that we have to do whether we want to or not, or whether we're up for it or not. But it will tell you something about yourself and where your inner world is. And that can often help me get through an outer world series of stuff that I just have to do. It's like, well, let me just take care of this, this, and this, these errands, that chore, various other kinds of things. Because I'm in touch with looking forward to tonight when I can settle down with a book or some quiet time or talk to that friend that I really miss. At least I know where my energy, what it's thirsty for.
Yeah. I like that, Deb. I like the idea of thirst. And we can even ask ourselves, just like sometimes we get so busy that we miss physical cues of for hunger or thirst. I mean, that happens to me all the time. I'm like,
I wish it would happen to me.
well, right. But we can miss our own thirst for this connection with something larger than ourselves. And so I like that word.
Now I'm going to enact that.
Yeah, there we go. The self is ordering you to drink.
But it's interesting. I mean, you just touched on something that made me aware, and that was great that it happened interactively.
Yeah.
If we sit with ourselves for just a second, how quickly an awareness can pop up.
When we begin to trust turning within, that kind of pausing, suspending the magnetic relationship to the outer world, or our Zen friends talk about the 10,000 things that pull us into desire, pull us into the outer world.
Yep.
We have to create a little secret temenos around us, and then we turn in. We're going to notice all kinds of things when we turn within. There's memories, there's associations, there's the chatter of our waking mind, the chatter of memories. There's all kinds of things inside. So there's a sorting process that has to go on. And this is, again, where journaling can be very helpful, where we begin to kind of notice the flotsam and jetsam that's also just on the surface of consciousness. And one of the ways to kind of brush that aside is to just write it down. I'm a great list maker. When I have thoughts that come in, I just write them down. But part of that is I'm writing them down so I can relieve my ego of trying to remember it because it's important. Because I kind of want to get that, the leaves off of the top of the pool so that I can look a little bit deeper down.
Yeah.
And that's true for all of us. That's a natural sifting down process. When you begin to notice things, and for me, this is a process that I was able to pull together when I was about 19. This way of reaching upward in a particular fashion, having a sense of impulses and images that were descending down into me. I would notice that I was being influenced and tapped in certain directions, and that certain images and ideas and impulses I would become aware of. What age has afforded me is that there are many possibilities that will descend into us that can even seem rather remarkable. But I take each of those ideas and I put them in a discrete little nest inside of my awareness, and I wait to see where libido is going to accumulate. Because early in my life, an idea might seem marvelous, but if the unconscious didn't give me enough energy to bring it to a conclusion, it was just painful and useless. So now, and I've been doing this about 15, 20 years, I will tend the many nests, like the chicken coop in my head, check on them every so often.
Yep.
But if that egg's not chirping from the inside, or this idea over here isn't capturing any libido, nowadays I am not going to keep trying to make life force flow towards something that is not either not ready, or perhaps is not something that is meant to be born in my world. Maybe it's just meant to be something that sails by and I take a glance at it, but it's not actionable in all circumstances. So the actionable inner guidance for me is the thing that begins to build a vortex around it. And then I kind of wait until it gets to a critical moment. And I've made this do with my unconscious and with the self. I said, listen, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but you have to provide all the vitality for me to bring that to a conclusion. And if you won't do that, I won't act on it. Like that's the bargain that I've made with wherever this stuff comes from, because I am tired of just left hanging the bag.
Yeah. Well, and it's like in some sense, the source of the vitality is the self, and it's going to sort of power you through, if it's the right thing. So, you're mentioning that this is kind of a way of listening to the self. I mean, I think my experience is often that I don't know what I know for a while. And it can take me a long time to hear it. I think of that, sort of still small voice quote from the Bible that God appears to Elijah as a still small voice. And boy, it is sometimes really hard to hear. So when I'm feeling confusion, my emotions can get in the way. Maybe I'm really dysregulated and upset. And that leads me to kind of catastrophize at times, and then I can't see clearly. So for me, it's like there's a process. I like your image, Joseph, of sort of like taking the leaves off the surface of the water. It's sort of like I have to once I'm aware that there's a question, even if I can't formulate it yet, I'm just like, okay, there it is, and then just make room for it. Just like, okay, it's not offering itself to me as a clearly defined and well formulated question right now, so I'm not going to push it, which I think is sort of similar to what you're saying. I'm going to let it hang, but I'm not going to forget about it. And then maybe in a week or two, there's a dream, a scene in a movie, something happens and something kind of crystallizes for me. And then I'll have the question. And then it's like a little rock you can hold in your pocket because it has words. And then I might journal about it. And then I might pull a tarot card about it. And then I might go for a walk. Sometimes going for a walk or like a run, it just sort of clears the air, and you just, sometimes if I'm really distressed or confused, I'll go for a long walk. And I think that when I come home, you always go through some small transformation whenever you go for a walk. You come back in a different mood, you come back with a different perspective. And so that for me is a big way. And then like sometimes there can just be I mean, I remember that. I remember, I'm thinking of a specific time when I was in college and I had been dating this guy. Should have broken up with him a long time ago, but I was young and stupid. And I remember I used to jog a lot back then, which was so great. I wish I could do that now. But I went out for a jog and I just came back and I just knew. I just knew that I had to break up with him, and I did. And it was just like, that. So for me, I guess I'm rambling, but for me, I can remember this other time I was trying to make a decision and I was like, I will know what to do when I wake up from this nap. And I did. So, but for me, there must be something about sort of dropping it in and then just seeing what comes up. And, sometimes you go to the unconscious with a question or looking for guidance and it doesn't offer anything. I mean, that happens. But a lot of times it is just like, yep, you got to break out the one. No, you shouldn't take that job. Whatever it is. That's something I've relied on throughout my life.
My way of thinking about what you've just said, Lisa, is two things. One is the process of just notice. Just notice what's going on inside. Pay attention. Maybe, like you said, Joseph, have a basket somewhere of there was this idea or that possibility or what should I do about. So I'm going to check those baskets or in the chicken coop of my mind and see if those eggs are starting to hatch. But the other thing you're talking about is change the channel. And I find that an incredibly useful thing to do. Go take a walk, take a nap, make a meal. Anything that gets you involved in something else so that you step out of it, whatever the it is, into a different mood or into something different to think about, or getting out of that dead end of confusion or anxiety or whatever it might be. Just change the channel and then come back to it later.
Right. So I think that's a really good advice about understanding that our habits often can trap us and lock us away from that state of receptivity and readiness, which would allow potentially something new to emerge, something novel and something more useful. I do want to come back to the biblical quote that you had mentioned briefly, which is in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 12. And I want to set this up a bit because we can analyze this as a bit of a dream because it is giving, I think, very interesting archetypal advice. So I'm just going to read these just a few paragraphs and we can jump into it. Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including how he had executed all the prophets of Baal. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah. She said, "May the gods strike me dead if by this time tomorrow I don't take your life the way you took the lives of Baal's prophets." Frightened, Elijah fled to save his life. He came to Beersheba in Judah and left his servant there. Then he traveled through the wilderness for a day. He sat under a broom plant and wanted to die. "I've had enough now, Yahweh," he said. "Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." He then lay down and slept under the broom plant. An angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." When he looked, he saw near his head some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water, so he ate, drank, and went to sleep again. The angel of Yahweh came back and woke him up again. The angel said, "Get up and eat, or your journey will be too much for you." He got up, ate, and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled for 40 days and nights until he came to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Then Yahweh spoke his word to Elijah, and he asked, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, Yahweh Elohim Sabaoth, I have eagerly served you. The Israelites have abandoned your promises, torn down your altars, and executed your prophets. I'm the only one left, and they're trying to take my life. Yahweh said, Go out and stand in front of the mountain. As Yahweh was passing by, a fierce wind tore mountains and shattered rocks ahead of him. But Yahweh was not in the wind. After the wind came an earthquake, but Yahweh wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake was a fire, but Yahweh wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, there was a still, small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his coat, went out, and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then the voice said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? And it goes on from there. So there's something so appropriate about this that Elijah is in a panic. I mean, he is fleeing for his life.
Right.
He has done something, by the way, very provocative. He's killed all of the prophets of Baal. I mean, he is a criminal based on that system, and he's on the run. And he's getting messages that these people are going to come after him. He's also in total despair. He's suicidal. He's saying, I don't even want to live anymore. This is too much. And then he goes to sleep, and things happen in his sleep. One could interpret the visitation of the angels as dreams, that something transcendent talks to him and strengthens him. As that continues forward, his senses open up very widely, as we were saying. There's wind and earthquakes and fire. The outer world is churning and rumbling.
Right.
He's staring at all of it. But upon reflection, I imagine, he realizes, that's not where the guidance is going to come from.
Right.
The guidance isn't going to come from the winds of the culture that shatter the mountains around me. Guidance isn't going to come from these earth-shaking tweets that I read and the fire that's set in motion in everybody from that TikTok influencer.
Right.
That's not going to do it. That none of these things are going to help me, although the world is on fire and shaking and blazing. But he's able to know that the self isn't in those things, although they are happening and his senses are reporting them. And then, because he's in a cave, by the way, he's able to then listen. And then he hears the voice of inner guidance. And then he wraps his face in his coat and he steps out of the cave, because one cannot behold the face of Yahweh and live. That there must be some kind of respectful barrier between him. And then there's still a small voice that says something that's just so pragmatic.
Yeah.
What are you doing here, Deb? What are you doing here, Lisa? What are you doing here, Joseph? What are you doing?
Well, it's pragmatic and something. And so kind of quotidian, but on the other hand, it's a very profound question.
Yes.
What is any of us doing here?
Absolutely.
And in some sense, each of us is called to answer that question. So, which kind of wraps it up in a way that the inner guidance is about the ego receiving something from the self, but it does also make a demand on us. And we are answerable to that still small voice. We are answerable to that guidance. What are we doing? What are we going to do with it?
Yes. In the next paragraph, he gets some pretty explicit instructions, which would daunt most of us. Yahweh then tells him what he should be doing, because he doesn't seem to be understanding what he's doing there. Go back to the wilderness near Damascus the same way you came. When you get there, anoint Hazael, the king of Aram. Anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king of Israel, and anoint Elijah, son of Shaphat, from Abel Meholah as prophet, to take your place, and on and on. That the first question is, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And then all of this instructive material after that.
I think I want to make the point here, too, that this is a dialogue. And ultimately, our waking minds, our egos, have to decide, does this ring true? How do I really deeply understand that? Of like, what am I doing here? That just because something comes up as an intuition, a voice, a vision, a dream,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that, well, now I have to do that. My dream took place in Idaho, and that means I have to move to Idaho.
Right.
No. Let's stop a minute. Not so fast. What does Idaho mean, let's say, to me? We have to keep on talking, that inner voice and I. And that ultimately it is our egos and our administrative minds that have to make the call.
Right. That's a good way of putting it, Deb. I like that.
Well, I'm wondering if any of you are hearing a still small voice, which could be my voice, still and small, saying, become our patron on Patreon. Pay no attention to the fierce winds of the stock market. Don't worry about your failing marriage. Just because the earth is shifting underneath you, come to Patreon. And there, deposit some of your resources to keep us up and running.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we do have a Patreon page. If you go to thisjungianlife.com, right in the banner at the top, tap on Patreon. It'll take you to our page, and you can help us continue to provide depth, Jungian insights, and continue our mission, which is to travel through this world, this cyber world, and introduce people to ideas like inner guidance, ideas like the self, understanding who we are, how to navigate difficult things. But we need you. You need to come and help us out. And the way you can help out is just making a monthly donation set up through Patreon. And as part of our appreciation, we will field questions that you ask us. We will choose dreams that you submit and exclusively interpret them and provide that only for you. So please listen to my still small voice and at least navigate over to our Patreon page and just take a look at it. And hopefully a gradient will form, libido will flow, and you will feel incredibly inspired to give us a hand.
I just want to say that, our podcast is free. More and more podcasts are going subscription only. But, I'm always impressed because I'm usually the dream picker. I know who's listening because you send in your dreams, and there are lawyers and doctors who send in dreams, but there are also bus drivers and kindergarten teachers and waitresses and unemployed people and students. And I'm always moved to see the kind of wide variety of walks of life of people who are attending to their dreams, listening to the podcast, bothering to click on that form and send in a dream. And so it feels important that we are making this offering for free, but we do need something to sustain it because it's actually pretty expensive to produce. So I do want to say, when you go to our podcast, unfortunately, it doesn't say Patreon right at the top. You have to click on podcast, and then you'll see the drop-down menu, become our patron. So we probably need to fix that. But for right now, that's how you find our Patreon. So
yeah, just decide you're going to have 2 fewer Starbucks mocha latte almond milk frappuccinos and macchiatos. Just decide you're not going to do 2 of those and take the funds from that and just toss it over the fence into this Jungian life on Patreon so that we can then use that to do some good stuff. Our dreamer today is a 49-year-old male who is an airline pilot, and he titles this The Abattoir. I had a post-apocalyptic dream, was trying to find safety in a bombed-out town overrun with death squads working for a dictator. I was being hunted along with many others. Past a mass grave on the side of the road, young men had dug their own graves. They all have a patch of their back cut out, exposing their liver or kidney, and in a synchronized manner, they all shot themselves in the head and fell into the graves. At some later point, I think I was captured and led forcibly through an abattoir happily run by a guy that looked like Walter White. It was a human meat processing plant, and there was ground human flesh everywhere on the ground. Walter White said that it was for turning people into dog food. He said dogs were great for destroying people's identities. I had to hide somewhere at some point, and I was in a tiny house. There was some sort of curfew, and I couldn't be outside. I wanted to look for my partner, but I couldn't leave. My mother was there, and she tried hiding me behind an old stove, but there was no space. And there were tiny newborn kittens wandering around. At some point, I moved to the basement, and there was a computer, and I was trying to look up what was happening in the world. For context, he writes, like many people right now, I've been spending a lot of time worrying about the world and my future. The main feelings were dread and horror, and a few associations he offers: general horror at the situation and fear of capture. I was relieved when my late mom was trying to hide me, but frustrated that the hiding place was too small. That is an apocalyptic dream.
And these are not that uncommon. I mean, this is one that has, I think, some particularly disturbing and gruesome elements, but I'm sure we've all heard dreams that are kind of like this. We've probably all had dreams that are like this. It can be so disturbing to have a dream like this. And it is always tempting to see it as a sort of a commentary on the outer world. But I think it might be helpful to focus on what it might mean in the inner world. And, you know, the person has this association to the uncertainties in the world right now. I think it's making all of us very, very anxious. But you know, I am more interested in what this dream says about the dreamer psyche. Now, he didn't tell us a lot. There are not a lot of associations. There's not a lot of context. So I'm just going to have a fantasy with it. And what I notice is that he is, and I'm just going to check the age again. I think he's 49. Is that right?
Yes.
He's 49 and he's an airline pilot, which I'm assuming is a pretty stressful job, I would think. And at 49, yeah, I mean, is one, I'm just speculating here, is one potentially getting a little burnt out? You know, is one worried about what comes next? It's kind of like a midlife spot. The thing that struck me about the dream, I mean, there's many, many things that struck me about the dream, but one of the first things that made something ping for me was that, well, first of all, I love that Walter White shows up in this dream because he's such a great character, and we could talk a lot about him. But he says that dogs are great for destroying people's identities. That you're going to get human flesh just ground up. It's kind of an image of it's a violent image of the alchemical process of solutio. Dissolution. You're going to get ground up. You're going to get dissolved into a vat of battery acid. You're all going to come apart. Your identity is going to be devoured. And what is that going to leave? I mean, and you know, shamanic visions, that the visions that shamans have, especially when they're kind of going through a sort of inner initiation into their shamanic role, almost always have these images of dismemberment and gruesome images, kind of like this. I mean, it might be interesting if this dreamer wanted to do this, to look at some of these accounts from shamans about what their kind of inner process was like. It is like being ground up and just completely obliterated, so that you become reconstituted. And when you do so, you have access to both realms. I mean, you've gone through a process whereby your ego has been really relativized. And now you can, I mean, very, very much like we were talking about in this episode, you can contact the inner world too. So I have other things to say, but I'll let you guys take a nibble at it too.
Well, one of the things that I always find interesting about the word apocalyptic is that the word apocalypse means revelation.
Mm.
And because the process of revelation in that mythopoetic telling is so intense, it's so frightening, it seems so destructive, but also it is the natural process of birth, death, and resurrection, salve et coagula, which we can say so cleverly and so easily, but the actual subjective experience of feeling that maybe a central guiding attitude in your life is being sacrificed or has died and now requires a totally different orientation to life.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal, and it's difficult and scary and unsettling, and can take a couple of years, where a lot of old ideas, old feelings, old orientations get drowned, sacrificed, dissolved, killed off. And if we look at the apocalypse, the revelation is that then the self descends, which is called the New Jerusalem, descends from heaven, and in the center of New Jerusalem is the Lamb that illuminates the New Jerusalem, which is an extraordinary mythic presentation of a new personality where the self is the illuminating, guiding center that replaces the terrible, destructive aftermath.
I'm paying attention to a couple things here. One is, I hope everybody remembers who Walter White is. We haven't said that. He is the protagonist, the main character in the series Breaking Bad, where our sort of Walter Mitty type of high school chemistry teacher becomes basically a drug lord and meets with no good end. But what I also wanted to pay attention to was the presence of dogs and cats. So dogs are great for destroying people's identities. And you've touched on that, and that the dog food will feed the dogs to effect this transformation. Our dreamer is 49. He's right at midlife when the external world focus starts to turn to the inner world. And as you said, Lisa, you both said in different ways, that things come apart, sometimes in pretty gruesome ways. And so there's going to be food for dogs. So I might turn to my symbol dictionary and think about dogs and what are dogs. Of all things, there are dogs that are going to be fed on the remains of people. And then at the end of the dream, when he finds refuge in this tiny house, it's too small. He cannot hide behind the maternal hearth, the stove. Sorry, you can't do that either. But there are newborn kittens wandering around. So I might again think about this as another expression of of new life and innocence, of all the animals that the dream maker has access to, from platypuses to giraffes.
Right.
Here are two images of instinctive life that have been chosen. And then I'm curious about the ending of the dream. So all these things happen, and then what? And I think of these things as sort of the kicker of the dream. We like to call it the lysis, but I think of it as the kicker from all those O. Henry stories where all of a sudden at the end there's a twist. So here's the twist. I moved to the basement and there was a computer and I was trying to look up what was happening in the world. So there's a descent. And that's often kind of good news of going down, but not paying attention to the kittens or your inner life, but turning on the computer as if the answer will be found out there instead of what we've just been talking about on this podcast, that the answer is in here, not out there.
Yeah, I noticed that about the last line too, that there's sort of a withdrawal from the conflict. So he's in a psychic conflict that's very active. And I think you're right, Doug. I think those kittens are extraordinarily important. That's kind of where the telos in the dream is, the kind of surprising new thing. But then there's a withdrawal from the conflict and a removal from the immediacy. Like he's going to find out about it by looking online. I want to bring up one other element. We haven't talked about the dictator. So the whole thing is run by the dictator. And there's a couple different ways one could think about that. But I'm thinking about it in this sort of Kalshettian way, that this is sort of a persecutor protector kind of dynamic here. So the dictator looks like a bad guy who presumably is presiding over this scene of terrible destruction. But it's possible, and I do think there's more than one way of looking at this, so this is just one possibility. It's possible to say that this entire apocalypse that he's looking at, and you made the point, Joseph, that it's sort of a revelation, is just the revelation of the new attitude that at this point to the ego looks, it looks apocalyptic. It looks like a bloodbath. Because maybe it is going to be a bloodbath for his former values and his former attitudes. But it might be that dictator who is kind of forcing him into a very difficult position where there's the potential for extreme suffering, that's exactly what the psyche needs, only it looks negative to the ego because of the ego's orientation to the problem, if that makes sense.
I'm aligned with all of that. The thing I keep indexing on and would talk to this guy about is, in what ways are you shooting yourself in the head? We make mistakes. We keep doing something over and over like a repetition compulsion. It's like, God, I set up this whole miserable circumstance for myself. I shot myself in the foot, that whole thing. So there is something about that. And because there are many young men shooting themselves in the head, it's this iteration, this multiplicatio of the same image over and over and over again to make sure that the ego is really thinking about how he may be participating in a self-destructive choice, or is pondering it, or has been doing it. And if one could really think it through, is that really what you want to be doing? Is this a thoughtful thing?
And what is interesting here is that what is going on is all these young men who are about to die have a patch on their back cut out exposing their liver or a kidney, and then they shoot themselves and fall into their graves. But the liver and the kidney are symbolic instructions, I think, to the dreamer to listen up. That it's not the bladder that is exposed. It's not your lung that is exposed. So what is your liver and what is your kidney? Well, they are the body's purification systems. They rid the body of toxins. And so it's very meaningful that the dream maker has selected this. And I might ask this dreamer of where is your symbolic liver and where is your symbolic kidney? Overtaxed, not working, exposed. What about that? And often I just want to make clear that the answer at these, what I'm assuming is obviously a midlife occurrence, maybe in a much bigger context. It doesn't mean that, you need to change careers and become a kindergarten teacher, but of what about your orientation, your attitude towards your life, yourself, relationships? Where is that draining you instead of working properly?
Yeah, and the kidney in kind of a lot of kind of mythological systems or symbolically, it's associated with the seat of life. And so it makes me wonder about, your vitality and your energy for life.
I'm also thinking about that sentence, which I think is great, is that dogs are great for destroying people's identities. And when I think of the identity, I think of the persona.
Right.
So if I think of what's being ground up
Right.
is his persona, and that dogs are great for destroying persona. And when I said about that, having been a dog owner much of my life, dogs will do a lot of things that would embarrass you. They'll poop right in front of you, pee right in front of you, lick their bodies, they'll jump on you. That dogs are these kind of enthusiastic creatures that don't experience embarrassment. They are themselves, unless they've been traumatized. A dog is himself and is right there with you and next to you and is deeply loyal and connected, etc. So I think about, the doggishness inside of him that is working to break down his persona. And when this appearance of the dogs that can gobble up his persona, then he wants to hide from that, hide away, and then the hiding leads him into a regression. And then he's looking for mommy and mama cats and baby kittens, and then he's kind of like leading an incel life in the basement with a computer, trying to look up what's happening in the world somewhere else while he's in mom's basement. So, and that often happens, that when there's a big change inside of us, sometimes we do have to go through a regression.
Yep.
And I like something you've said, Lisa, that a regression is like unraveling a sweater that you've been knitting to pick up a missed stitch and then to move forward again. So sometimes we just do. We just have to go back in time in order to reconstruct something that didn't go right at the beginning.
And we wish this dreamer the best.
Of course.
Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.